The mop bucket stopped rolling 3 feet from the door. Daniel Reyes stood frozen in the hallway, back pressed against cold marble. Listening to his daughter's fingers move across piano keys, he had tuned himself, by hand, at 2 in the morning, for 2 years. He did not breathe. He did not move. Somewhere behind that door, 16-year-old Mia Reyes was pouring her whole heart into a piece of music, unaware that the man who kept that piano singing was crouched behind a supply cart 10 feet away, wearing a gray uniform with his name stitched crookedly above the pocket. She believed the conservatory simply maintained its instruments well. She had no idea her father had built a second life in these halls after midnight, a life made entirely of secrecy, sacrifice, and a debt to his own dead father that he had never told a living soul about. Tonight, that secret was 11 days from being destroyed. And so was everything Mia had worked for. If you believe quiet sacrifice deserves to be seen, stay with this story until the end, because what happens to this father is about to happen in front of the very people who never noticed him at all. Before the conservatory, before the mop and the midnight shifts, before Mia ever touched a piano, there had been another boy in another decade who sat at these same keys with the same hunger in his chest. Daniel Reyes was 17 when he was accepted into the Ashford Conservatory of Music on a scholarship so rare the paperwork still bore his signature in the archive room nobody visited anymore. His father, Manuel, was a piano tuner, not a famous one, not a wealthy one. No, just a man with calloused fingers and a perfect ear who fixed instruments for families who could never have afforded him if he'd charged what he was worth. Manuel taught his son everything: how to hear the smallest imperfection in a string, how to coax warmth out of a cold hammer, how to listen to an instrument the way most people listen to another human being. Then Manuel died. Suddenly, and without warning, in the middle of a Tuesday that started like any other, there was no scholarship for grief. There was no fund for a boy who now had to support his mother and 2 younger sisters. Daniel withdrew from Ashford Conservatory in a letter he wrote at 19 years old, in handwriting that still shook when he signed it. He never played publicly again. He packed his dream into a box he never opened, and he built a life instead, quiet, unglamorous, defined by the paychecks it produced rather than the music it silenced. Years passed. He married. He lost his wife too early. He raised a daughter who, without ever being taught the history, fell in love with the exact same instrument that had once defined and then discarded her father. Mia did not know any of this. She only knew that her father worked 3 jobs: days delivering auto parts, evenings stocking shelves, and nights somewhere he never fully explained, somewhere he always came home from smelling faintly of polish and dust. She thought it was simply what it took for a single father to keep a roof over their heads. She never once suspected that somewhere was the very building she dreamed of attending. The Founder's Scholarship at Ashford Conservatory was awarded once a decade, and it was the only realistic path for a girl like Mia, brilliant, self-taught on a second-hand piano. But without the money or connections that opened every other door in that world, Daniel had learned months earlier, mopping floors outside a boardroom he was never meant to overhear, that the scholarship had quietly gone to a board member's child in 9 of the last 10 years. The auditions were real. The outcome, more often than not, was already decided before a single note was played. He said nothing to Mia. He couldn't bring himself to extinguish the one dream she had left, especially not when a new head judge had just been appointed, a renowned concert pianist named Elena Kichmarek, whose reputation for integrity preceded her into every room she entered. Daniel allowed himself, for the first time in 20 years, to hope that merit might finally matter again. He kept practicing his own quiet ritual. Every night, once the halls were empty, he would sit beside the piano in practice room 4, the one with, as Mia called it, the good keys, and repair what the years wore down, using the same techniques his father had taught him decades earlier. He never signed his work. He never took credit. He simply made sure that when his daughter sat down to play, the instrument answered her the way instruments are supposed to answer people who love them. He did not know that on her first week reviewing the facility, Elena Kuchmarek had stopped at that very piano, played a single chord, and asked the staff a question that would end up rewriting everything. Who has been maintaining this instrument? The answer she received was simple, almost dismissive: the janitor. She said nothing more that night, but she remembered. The board member who mattered most was a woman named Colleen Ashford Whitfield, a major donor whose son Weston was talented, genuinely talented, but had never once had to fight for a single opportunity in his life. When Colleen learned that a nobody might actually threaten her son's guaranteed placement this year, she did not simply make a phone call to influence a vote. She moved with the quiet ruthlessness of someone who had never been told no. Within days, a fabricated complaint appeared in Daniel's employee file. His night shift contract was terminated, timed with surgical precision, exactly 1 week before Mia's final audition, ensuring she would lose access to her practice room and her piano at the worst possible moment. Daniel found out on a Tuesday, fittingly the same day of the week his own father had died. He said nothing to Mia. He simply kept smiling at dinner, kept pretending, kept absorbing the blow alone the way he had absorbed every blow for 16 years, quietly, so she would never have to carry the weight of it. But secrets, no matter how carefully built, do not survive forever. Mia arrived at the conservatory one evening, sheet music in hand, ready for one of her final practice sessions before the audition that would determine the rest of her life. Instead, she found her father standing in the lobby, flanked by 2 security guards, his badge already confiscated, a small cardboard box of his belongings tucked awkwardly under one arm. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The lobby, usually so full of music, was silent, except for the low hum of fluorescent lights. "Dad." Her voice cracked on a single syllable. You work here?" It came out all at once, the way truths do when they can no longer be held back to years of nights. The piano he had secretly repaired with his bare hands, the reason the good keys never seemed to fail her. And now, the final piece, he had just lost the only job that let him remain close to her dream. And he had lost it trying in his own silent way to protect her. Mia did not cry in that lobby. She simply stood there, staring at a man she suddenly realized she barely knew, despite having lived beside him her entire life. For 3 days afterward, Mia refused to touch a piano. She told herself she was withdrawing from the audition out of principle. She would not accept anything else from a father who had already given her everything and lost his job doing it. But grief has a way of masking itself as decision. It was while searching through her father's closet, tending to return his conservatory keycard, that she found the photograph. Yellowed at the edges, tucked inside an old cigar box that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. A teenage boy, unmistakably her father, seated at a grand piano, wearing an Ashford Conservatory acceptance letter like a badge of pride, decades before his hands ever touched a mop. Beneath the photograph was the letter itself, the withdrawal letter. Written in shaking 19-year-old handwriting, explaining that he could no longer attend, that his father had passed, that his family needed him more than the conservatory did. Mia sat on the floor of that closet for a long time. She understood finally that this dream had never belonged only to her. It belonged to her father first. It had simply been waiting, patiently, folded into a box for over 20 years, for someone strong enough to finish what he had started. She decided, in that quiet moment, that she was not going to withdraw. She was going to finish it for both of them. Alina Kuchmarek, meanwhile, was doing what few people at Ashford Conservatory had bothered to do in decades. She was reading the archives. Buried in a file cabinet nobody had opened since before Mia was born, she found a name that stopped her cold: Daniel Reyes. Scholarship recipient withdrawn for family hardship, file never formally closed. The prodigy the conservatory had quietly let disappear the moment he could no longer pay his own way. She looked at the maintenance records. Same name, same building, still tending to the instrument he had once dreamed of mastering, still giving this place everything he had, decades after it had given up on him. This was not sentimentality to Alina Kuchmarek. This was an institution's unfinished debt, sitting quietly on her desk, waiting for someone with enough authority to finally pay it. The final audition day arrived beneath the watchful eyes of the donor board. Colleen Ashford Whitfield, seated in the front row with the calm certainty of a woman who believed the outcome had already been arranged. Weston played first, competent and polished, exactly as expected. Then Mia walked to the piano, the same piano her father had repaired 1,000 quiet nights. String by string, hammer by hammer, out of love disguised as duty. Before she could sit, Alina Kuchmarek rose from the judge's table and asked a single question, loud enough for the entire room to hear. "Do you know why this piano sounds better than every other instrument in this building?" Mia looked out at the room, at the donors, at Weston, at the empty seat where her father was not allowed to sit, watching instead through a narrow window in the door. And she answered honestly. She spoke of a janitor who had once been a scholarship student, of a piano tuner's son who gave up his own dream at 19 to keep his family fed, Of 2 years of midnight repairs performed with the same weathered hands that had packed her school lunches every morning. Of a father who worked 3 jobs not because he had no other choice, but because he refused to let his daughter's dream die the way his own once had. By the time she finished speaking, the room was no longer watching an audition. It was confronting 20 years of a debt it had chosen for decades not to remember. Mia sat down. She played the piece her father had spent 2 years quietly tuning her toward, note by note, without her ever knowing it. She won the scholarship that day, but the win was never really the point. What mattered more happened 3 days later, when Elena Kaczmarek, now armed with the full weight of her position, formally reopened Daniel Reyes' abandoned scholarship file and offered him something the conservatory should have offered him 20 years earlier, a place on its faculty, teaching the very instrument he had never stopped loving, even when it had stopped loving him back. Daniel Reyes now walks the halls of Ashford Conservatory not as a janitor hiding behind a supply cart, and not as a forgotten prodigy filed away and forgotten, but as a teacher, the same halls his daughter now walks as a student. 2 dreams that had once been separated by 20 years of silence, finally allowed to exist in the same room at the same time in the open. Some debts take decades to be repaid. Some sacrifices go unseen for years before the world finally catches up to what quiet dignity has known all along. That the people who give the most are so often the ones asking for the least in return. If this story moved you, remember Daniel Reyes the next time you pass someone doing work the world overlooks. You never truly know whose dream they are quietly keeping alive.